joining us today. You're obviously two very different people, but one common denominator at least, if not more. You're both KOLs in China and foreigners. So how did you make it? Let's start with Antoine, to become a key opinion leader in the country.
Okay, hi Martina and Shirley, thank you for the invitation. So, I actually have media equipment because I do a lot of media work. I've worked in media for over 15 years, first in the UK and then in China. I have a career in global media communications, online marketing, advertising, e-commerce, etc. This is my background, but I've always had a passion for cooking. And when I arrived in China, I went online on Weibo and I started posting my food photos, and it snowballed from a hobby passion into something insane, where I've been invited on hundreds of shows, TV shows, online shows. I've had hundreds of millions of views online, and now I've got lots of fans. I share my recipes, and not just recipes, but also lifestyle. Very much so, especially I have two boys, two kids, so I talk a lot about education and environmental beliefs. So I try and convey good ideas to change, to impact China positively as much as I can.
Fionn, tell us your story.
Oh, wow. After hearing Antoine is someone that I've also been following for a long time. I absolutely love his work. And in some ways we're very similar, in some ways very different. I also have a big focus on family. So that's really where my China sort of sharing started. Was I started on a few different Chinese TV shows, a lot of them about parenting, about how we can be better with our children, how we can raise them in more effective ways, how we can educate them in different ways. And it was interesting also in that I left China a few years ago, and I thought I was leaving for good at the time. And it was because my eldest son was coughing a lot. And so we thought the pollution wasn't great for him. So we decided to leave. We went across back to Ireland, where I'm originally from, and we started this live stream channel. And for some reason, the live stream channel just kind of blew up, and we had a whole lot of people watching it every day. And we thought, this is kind of interesting. So we started sharing with some Irish companies when we were back out in Ireland, and they were thinking, maybe we can sort of sell some products to China. They've been trying with a whole lot of different agencies, and they hadn't been able to sell anything. And suddenly we showed some of their products on our live stream, and their sales went through the roof. And they were like, oh my God, just whatever you're doing, just keep doing that. And so we basically traveled around Ireland, around the world really for a while. And that was sort of our main full-time thing for a little while. And it was a lot of fun, really enjoyed it. But I've pivoted in the last few years since that. And I now spend a lot more time with individuals, mostly entrepreneurs. A lot of people most of them are actually pretty established in the China market already, and they're just looking to get to the next level. And some of them who are just trying to enter the China market. And so these days I play around, I still go on TV shows occasionally, and still want to spread those good messages about how we can be better parents. But for the most part, I like the idea of supporting China in its development and helping get Chinese ideas out to the rest of the world, helping the rest of the world really understand China as well.
Yesterday, as a matter of fact, I was on Zoom with a Chinese conference, and the live audience at any given point in time was over 60,000 people. And similarly in the US or in the UK, we had a live conference at a good time, probably 1,000 people logging in. So 100 times amplification by Chinese media. So, why is Chinese so, first of all, interested in pragmatic subjects? And why is it that the Chinese are so much into, this whole social media phenomenon?
It's a great wide topic, Shirley, but I think for our audience, maybe one key thing to understand is that I believe because of China's history, China came a little bit late into capitalism, right? To simplify. And I think China has a strong desire to show its face and to catch up. I think China has a bit of embarrassment to have not done so well in the past economically. And I think China is really eager to show the world that it's the best. And I think that in many ways it already is. So we've seen an incredible evolution of, for example, of digital technology. I arrived in 2012 and I got in on Weibo, and then soon after WeChat arrived, and WeChat very soon overtook in terms of capacity, in terms of functionality, anything else that was done in the West, right? I used to do MBA lectures for mature MBA students from the US and Canada, and I used to blow their minds about what the Chinese had done by integrating video and gaming and recruiting and e-commerce in Weibo, WeChat, and all these platforms that have really incredible capacity. So if we apply this to the question of food, I think that China is also going to do the same. For example, there's a recent topic of the meatless burgers, the meatless solutions because of health, and it's a very current topic that we're passionate about because of the virus. So we talk a lot about health and the evolution of food. I think that this is happening as well in China, albeit more slowly. But there is one thing that I really want to make clear to the audiences watching who may not be familiar with China. There is something in China, it's paradox. There's always a contrast in China. So whenever you have something evolving really amazingly in China, you also have, on the other hand, a lot of things that are really far behind. And with everything, with food, you have the case where there's all kinds of trendy cafes and trendy, healthy, organic brands starting, but you also have an incredible rising obesity in China. Incredible. I've worked with the China Nutrition Society on some shows, for example, and they show that child obesity is a growing epidemic in China. So there's a lot of work to do. China is innovating very well, better than the West in many areas, and still is far behind in some other areas. But I do believe, to summarize, that there is a strong drive to push. The Chinese are very entrepreneurial, very entrepreneurial.
It's very interesting that you bring up the topic of plant-based meat. We have, for example, this increasing competition between the US and China as well on that front, because we have like producers such as Chen Meat in China as well that are, you know, expanding locally, not just like Beyond Meat or Impossible Foods as well. At the same time, you're mentioning this paradox that, you know, we don't probably see a huge wave of vegetarianism, and the WHO is also very concerned about obesity, that topic. So where do you see this, you know, organic food, plant-based meat, meatless products and so on evolve in China, Antoine?
The Chinese are so entrepreneurial and they're so keen on catching up with capitalism that you will definitely see more and more brands, Chinese brands, catching up on that. Look, you just have to take Tesla, for example, electric cars, right? And now you have a lot of Chinese brands doing electric cars. The Chinese are going to pump up a lot of vegetarian, organic, healthy brands, that's for sure.
We've already seen, for example, a lot of plant-based dumplings and mooncakes and so on. But, you know, you cooking on live television and with your live cooking shows, do you actually really, you know, rise the appetite of the Chinese audience?
I can tell you that I don't just do live. I do a variety of formats, from live and recorded videos. One of my platforms is a dedicated food platform called Xiachufang. And one example, I have had over 1 million views on my bread videos, right? And I have personally seen and personally commented on over 1,000 bread made by fans following my recipes. So I see how people cook, what they use, what ingredients they use, and how they make the food, which is really interesting because I am hands-on on the market. I can see people's kitchens, literally. And it's changing. But on the other hand, with this paradox I'm mentioning, there's always the very poor ketchup, the very poor bacon, and all these products that are still prevalent. But one thing that I think will make a key difference in China compared to the rest of the world is the government is very strong in making guidelines. And I think that in China, if the government, and I think it will eventually, regulate more what is marketed, especially to the young generations. And this could bring in business or cut business for a lot of companies, because when the government says something in China, that's the way it is.
And food safety.
And Fionn,
Yes.
back to you. So same question. same conference, probably, you invite a movie star or whatever on social media, on Zoom these days. In China, it's 100 times more amplification of people watching it live. Why are Chinese just glued to the phone, in more hours every day than, Western counterparts? How do you explain it?
Well, I think a certain amount of what Antoine said is really spot on. I think that China came slower in a lot of ways. It was behind in many ways, and now it's ahead in many ways. And so there was this sort of transition into technology where instead of going to laptop, where the rest of the developed world went, they went straight to mobile. And because they went straight to mobile, what happened was they developed applications in a mobile way that the rest of the world just didn't have. And so things like live streaming, they suit very well the mobile devices. And so what you'll see is these kinds of tech trends that take off in China. There's been an ecosystem that's developed now where the same kind of thing with technology just can't be developed anywhere else yet. Now, in the future, they will be. I think China's showing us what the future of the rest of the internet will look like. But you literally can't, like even just mini programs as an example within WeChat, right? Like mini programs, an app within an app, like we don't really have anything equivalent in the West yet. And so what you're seeing with the Chinese audiences is that they're open to these new technologies. They're willing to try, they're willing to test in a way that I don't see anywhere else. And so with live streaming, what happens is, they start watching and they see new content, and then, a new platform like Douyin pops up and they're willing, oh yeah, I'll try that out. And as they spend more time on it, it develops these entirely new ecosystems that sort of thrive together and build together. And it's like ecosystem on ecosystem on ecosystem. And then there's like, how can the rest of the world catch up? Like, you don't even have the base ecosystem. How can you build on top of that?
So do you think, Fionn, that there will be a convergence, like the West is going to catch up in the same direction with live streaming and buying and selling products online? Or do you think that it's a cultural thing as well, and that many Western consumers will not really fancy that kind of live streaming and shopping online in a live fashion?
Well, there are all those different factors in there. And one of the things I will say is I don't think the West is going to be able to catch up anytime soon. I think that there's an acceleration that's happening here that is even getting faster over time. And so it's going to be that the West is going to try to catch up, but as it tries to catch up, China's going to go even further ahead. And so they're going to be playing this, the West is going to be playing this catch-up game, at least from what I can see over the next few decades. After that, who knows? There's too many variables to be able to calculate after that. But the cultural piece is interesting because one of the things that we're seeing here in China now is the way in which not just the culture, but also like the government system and the way the government is actually willing to adopt technologies in the way that they're not willing to in the West. Like one example just with live streaming is, when they were building those two hospitals in Wuhan over 10 days, and the government just live streamed it for the whole population of China to be able to watch and see. Like what other government would do that? Or for example, like the deputy mayor in Wuhan that went on during the lockdown and was trying to help these sort of online local products to sell on live stream. Like what other ministers or government officials are going to do that in other countries? I don't see that anywhere else. So one of the things that really is very special here is the government's willingness to integrate these technologies and also to prototype and to test it out and to see what works. And the Chinese government really prototypes at scale. So if they see something works, they just launch it nationwide. And I think that that's one of the things here that really does make a huge difference.
So, Fionn, do you think if Western governments, if they, let's say hypothetically, removed all the regulatory barriers to live streaming, would there be a market in the West for this sort of thing?
Yeah, I would love to answer that. I just want to check in with Antoine because I was seeing he wanted to say something there. Do you want to share, Antoine?
Yes, you still hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
I just wanted to react to what Fionn said. The Chinese government is about to launch and test a digital money partnering with, I believe, McDonald's and Starbucks.
Yes.
So they are already, in my opinion, at least 5 years ahead of the West in terms of digital tech and digital payments. 5 years ahead. I was laughing because we have seen articles showing that Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, are trying to learn from WeChat. So we are really far from China being the factory of the world. We are now at the stage where it's the rest of the world trying to copy China.
So,
and in some ways, to follow up with your question there, Shirley, I think that's one of the factors that is going to be difficult for the West to follow, not only just because of the government structures and the ecosystems that exist here, but even cultural barriers like privacy. So I'll give you an example. When we used to do a lot more live streaming in our family, we would literally show our everyday life. Like our kids would be eating their breakfast, you know, and there'd be thousands, tens of thousands of Chinese people just watching my children eat their breakfast, you know, or we'd be going out and we'd be playing, you know, or we'd be like disciplining our children. Like, okay, my child is having a tantrum right now. How do I hold space for him to help him to learn how to go through this emotional process and to come out with a positive meaning so that he can develop as a human being? And watching, like letting thousands of people watch my child have a tantrum and me dealing with that. I think that's very rare for a Westerner. I think there's not a lot of Westerners that would be willing to let that kind of viewership into their home, into their family. Whereas in China, the concept of privacy is very different. People are willing to sort of share things in a way that in the West seems almost weird, almost strange. And people would ask me, what do you mean you would let thousands of people like watch you? Just like your daily activity? I was like, yeah, why not? You know, they're learning from me. You know, I'm also making income out of it. And, you know, they seem to be learning. They seem to be enjoying it. My kids get to sort of like talk and, you know, they're learning from a young age how to express themselves and, you know, how to be confident online and, you know, how to create their own brands from like this little age. And what's wrong with that? I mean, we're moving into a digital world, whether people like it or not. So the people who are going to get left behind are the people who are not willing to adopt it. And I think that that's one of the big factors here is people in China are willing to adopt it.
And talking about that, Fionn, I know that post the coronavirus outbreak in China back in February, you've written a couple of wonderful articles for social media sharing.
Inspired by you, by the way.
I'm greatly humbled, actually. So you talked about 8 to 10 digital innovations that could potentially promote China, you know, to really adapt to this technological advancement over the coming decade. And so tell us about these, you know, different categories of digital innovations.
Yeah, so I think coronavirus has really shown how effective many systems in China really are, and how ahead of the curve China is in so many different ways. And I think it kind of almost took a coronavirus type event for that to become so clear for the rest of the world. And so some examples of these kinds of things are like how quickly they flipped to online education, right? How quickly they were able to just get everyone the tools that they needed, or online work, right? Same sort of way. And so you see all these Chinese platforms adapting so fast, right? Like makeup filters. So, you know, women who would usually put on makeup before they go to work don't have to put makeup on and they look great on camera, right? Things like that, which in the West, I think companies wouldn't even think about, right? So there's this incredibly rapid speed of innovation. And that's coupled with, you know, the kind of structures that the government is creating. So the government is creating these smart cities, right? There's more smart cities in China than in the rest of the world combined, right?
Which one is the smartest? I'm going to stop you right here, Fionn.
Yeah.
Which city is the smartest city of the smartest cities in China?
So I don't want to give you a wrong answer here, but as far as I'm aware, it's probably Shenzhen. Now, there are some cities that they are sort of building from scratch, right? Like they're almost building a new city out of nowhere. And those cities, I think, in some ways are going to be more advanced than Shenzhen. But the way that you see it in Shenzhen, for example, is like all the buses are already electric, right? You see these like electric taxis everywhere. You see the way that the city has been, and because Shenzhen is also quite a young city, it's a very new city. It's grown out of nowhere, right? Just in the last few decades. So they've been able to implement all of these new things as the city was growing. And I think very soon we'll see some cities that are even more advanced than Shenzhen, but they're going to be new cities that maybe people have never even heard about before, and they're just popping up out of nowhere, and the Chinese government's dropping a whole lot of funds into them. And so this really does then tie back into this concept of the China dream, which is the Chinese government doesn't just think like the way that most governments do 4 years in advance, or maybe maximum 8 years, which is like a presidency term, or the time that a party is in power. But the Chinese government, they're thinking like 50 years, 100 years in advance. And so they're planning, and they have their 5-year plans, right? Their 5-year guidelines for where they're going to be going, but they have their 100-year vision. And with that 100-year vision, they really are planning out how they want to develop the whole country. And because of that, the coronavirus is, as far as I can see, just kind of like a blip on the radar. Like, oh yeah, the economy dropped for a few months at the beginning of 2020. But just looking even at the IMF reports for next year, for 2021, apparently according to what they project, the Chinese economy is going to be up at 9.3% next year, which is just phenomenal. It was 6.1% last year. Like, how is that even possible? And I think how it's possible is because the Chinese government has this capability to really sort of funnel resources where they need to go in the moment that they need to go. And I think that combination of high tech plus Chinese government intervention is what creates the conditions for China to be able to use this kind of a situation in the long term for its advantage and for its growth.
So, Antoine, following what Fionn has just said, coronavirus, ironically, has actually become an opportunity for China to further digitize. And I'm sure you are on social media every day. Do you see a significant rise of social media usage and consumption post the coronavirus that way? And how sustainable is it?
Absolutely, Shirley. It's very, very relevant to the conversation about digital because I focus on food, right? I talk a lot about food. It's my big passion. But with my digital background, one thing that I've really noticed in the past few months since the virus is that because people were not able to go outside to the restaurants like before, which is really common eating out in China, people have been cooking at home more. And because they lack ideas and recipes, we have seen an incredible surge in video views on our platforms because simply people are at home and they want new recipes, they want healthy recipes. So in the past few months, we've had thousands of daily fan increase every day, thousands of new fans on Weibo, on Xiachufang, because people are eager for the healthy and especially the Western lifestyle, which is perceived as healthy, which is what I promote. So salads and homemade breads and soups and pizza, pasta, all kinds of real, authentic food.
And Chinese love that. I mean, how
the Chinese love that.
Is Chinese to Western food today?
It's also a generational gap because when we talk about digital, we also talk about the younger generations being more online savvy. And you and I, we both know that the 20-year-olds, they use their phones more than the grandparents, and they also consume coffee, ice cream, bread, pizza, much more than the older generations. So the way that China, it's changing. People are using their phones more and they're using Western lifestyle, Western food a lot more. So the virus for us, actually, I'm sorry to say, the virus has been amazing for us. It's brought us a hell of a lot of fans.
Well, we hope we don't have one very soon. So, Fionn, is it sustainable? I mean, over the past weeks, I'm going to follow up on your digital innovation categories, but, just on the live streaming, itself, we started to see Domingju like a major corporate head China going live, and she's doing great. She's probably in her 50s, I'm guessing. And then you've got, as you mentioned, all these mayors, people in their 40s, 50s who's never been, they are not the social media generation, and they've gone online, tried their best, and they try to sell products all over. Let me ask you, all these mayors showing up on China's social media live streaming all of a sudden, you think they are being told by their superiors? Do they just volunteer themselves? I mean, is this sustainable? Are they going to be there forever? Is this going to be the state of life from here on?
The Chinese love to play. They're really cool. The Chinese love to play and love to stay young, right? For anyone who has not been to China, go to the parks and see the 60-year-olds and 70-year-olds exercising and doing fitness like to an amazing level into parks. So I'm not surprised there are 50, 60, 70-year-olds Chinese mayors or normal people who go online, who live stream. There's cases of 70 and 80-year-olds grandmothers live streaming and having millions of fans and making a lot of money. So the Chinese, they want to play. They love to play. They love gossip. They love games. They love online. And they're very entertaining. So it's clearly very Chinese. It works.
Yeah, and we're not just seeing like high profile individuals like these mayors or like these high tech people, you know, people like Jack Ma, who drops on a live stream occasionally. We're seeing people who you would almost assume that they didn't have access to technology. People like farmers, right, out in the middle of nowhere. And we've heard of Taobao villages, right? Like villages that have been created completely out of this whole e-commerce boom. But we're now seeing that like farmers out in the middle of nowhere are able to get an audience through live stream, and they're able to build up and show people like literally where the food is coming from. And it's really beautiful because one, it means that they have the ability to sell direct, which means that they get better margins, right? They cut out the middleman. It's great for the end farmers. But we're not just seeing that. I saw an article recently that shares that not only in China, but now we're actually seeing in Africa. And that there's these African farmers who like, they're trying to sell their coffee beans out to China. And because of live streaming now, they're actually able to sell like direct out to China. And it's like that's mind-boggling. We've never seen anything like that ever happen. And so I'm seeing that it's a trend that is going to not just impact China, but as the Chinese e-commerce ecosystem expands across the planet, which it's already doing, it's going to transform planet Earth. And this is something where, you know, to watch China and to spend time learning to see what's happening in China will really help anyone who's interested in business over the next few decades, because the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed, right? Like we're already seeing what's happening. And if people can watch that and they can learn from that, then if they're in other countries, they can get a head start and they can start running their businesses in ways that other people haven't even thought of yet.
So what does that mean to the future of work? Say, for example, we're starting to see all these major KOLs that are able to pull millions, tens of millions of followers every day on their daily live streaming sites. I mean, do they just look at a phone every day at home? And what I understand is they work extremely hard. I mean, they work like, other than sleeping, they probably are in front of a camera and just live streaming to audience like what we do. I mean, I cannot touch you. I don't, you know, there is no visual, physical contact other than the fact that I know there is another live human being on the other end. But I mean, that is their lifestyle, right? It's extremely lonely. I mean, if you amplify that to hundreds of millions of Chinese that are perhaps using that as a means of business in the future, what does that mean to work and social interactions and how we perceive, humanity?
I wouldn't say that they're lonely. I'll jump in on that because the top earning KOLs, they're actually very organized and they have big teams. People like Via, people like Austin Lee, they come on. They are business people and they have teams, they have assistants. So they're not lonely. Of course, there's a whole range of KOLs. There's a whole different type of, a whole different split. But it's definitely convenient for a lot of people to work from home and sell through this digital technology. But for me, I just want to have a word about the ethics behind the business capacity, because whilst it's wonderful to, my video is going and coming, I'll try it again. It's wonderful to have this capacity to sell and do e-commerce, but I see a lot of young generations who want to jump into being a KOL without any message, without any belief, or I want to use the word spiritual belief, because when you do KOL work, you should have a lifestyle set of values. And I do, because I promote healthy food, homemade food. I promote healthy education by getting the kids into the kitchen so that the next generation is not completely blind to what real food is as opposed to industrial fast food. So values are important, and I'm quite concerned by the next generation of young KOLs who don't seem to show much values apart from making money.
Yeah, I'm going to agree completely with Antoine there. I think values are a huge piece of this, and unfortunately, I think there's a lot of people who are trying to become KOLs for the wrong reason, and so because of that, we're having, a lot of this focus on materialism, a lot of this focus on who's richer, who's making more money, and even just the vanity metrics of who has more followers, like I'm better than you because I have, 1 million more followers than you. And it's like, come on, guys, this is not real life. This is just video streaming. And so part of what I think we need to look at here in this whole development of this industry is, how do we support people to be able to do this in a healthy way, like psychologically healthy too? Because as we know, those of us who use social media all the time, like it's not healthy to be always looking at your metrics and always checking how many people have liked me, how many people have followed me, because it becomes this sort of like this addiction. We get this dopamine addiction. And so one of the things that we need to be careful about also is, there are incredible opportunities for people. It's a whole new way of working. It's a whole new way of living. But the reality is that the vast majority of these people who are trying to become these KOLs, they're not making enough to do that as a full-time career, right? The people at the very top, people like Via and Austin Lee that Antoine mentioned, they're making millions of dollars a year, right? They can even sell hundreds of thousands of RMB of products in a single day, right? But the reality is that the vast majority of the people out there, they're very micro, nano KOLs, right? They have a small following, but that's not to say there's not value in that. And so for even the brands who are interested in tapping into the kind of the live stream or the KOL market, it's not necessarily always about who has the most followers. You want to be looking at and understanding who are the people who have the values that my business has. And this is where what Antoine is saying is really important, because if you stand for something, if you show that you care about something very deeply, then the brand can work with you, because they're not just interested in sort of saying, show my product and sell lots of them. It's maybe we can create a long-term relationship, and you can become like an advocate of our brand. You can become like someone who cares about what we do.
We should mention the time factor, because in China, being hot is normally very time limited. Things move so fast in China that a KOL now might have gone on to something else in 1 year's time, or might have disappeared because the platform on which that person was hot has been cut or has been taken by another platform. So the notion of time is so important in China. And this is where I am a bit of a special case, because I've been a KOL professionally since 2015. I'm still in, right?
So that's quite a longevity, isn't it, Antoine?
Yes, yes, I'm an old KOL.
It's very interesting, because recently there was a story about Zhang Dai, who was sort of the first generation of Chinese KOLs, and she's only 31, and people are calling, she's sort of the previous generation already. So does that give you a level of anxiety, because society moves so quickly? Today you are a KOL, everybody's following you. Tomorrow, probably not.
You have to be flexible in China. You have to be ready for anything. Personally, I'm okay. I have a lot of, I have a creative mind, and I have plans for the future as well. So I'm not scared, but yes, you should be flexible in China.
That's one of the things that people need to be aware of. I think anywhere in the world, but even more so in China, is the speed at which things change. I think that it's not really to fully understand the way that our minds are linear, but the world is exponential right now, especially when it comes to technologies. And so this idea that we can sort of like get on a platform and use it is like, well, it depends. It might be right now, but like Antoine said, next year that platform might die, might disappear, and you spent your whole career trying to build up on one platform. And so it's wise to be able to not just build up, followers or whatever on a specific platform, but again, coming back to the values, how are you building yourself as a person? And because the job market, because the business market is shifting, is changing so quickly, you want to be able to pivot. Right? You want to be able to sort of, if this project doesn't work, I do that project. If that project doesn't work, I do this project, right? And finding new ways of operating. And that's true now, not just in terms of entrepreneurship and being able to come up with new products or new ways of, hitting the market demand, but also in terms of your career. Thinking about people who even have jobs, the job cycle is faster now. People don't stay in companies as long, right? It's get in, get out, right? So how are you building your own personal brand? How do you build credibility in the market? And that's about really knowing your values, knowing your purpose, and living by those.
Fionn, behind you, you have a sign which says 中国梦, which means the China dream. It's obviously, a big initiative from the Chinese government as well, for, patriotic and nationalistic reasons as well. But if you can just quickly tell me, Fionn and Antoine, in a nutshell, what is your China dream as a Laowai, as a foreigner?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Martina, for that question. I mean, you can just see from the signpost here, the China dream is a passion of mine. And one of the reasons that is the case is because it's unlike the American dream. I think the American dream is a very individualistic dream. It's about like, how can I become rich, like rags to riches stories. Whereas the China dream, it's a collective dream. It's a dream for the whole nation. It's a, how can we become like a prosperous, harmonious society? And one of the things that I think the Chinese government has done very well is sort of looking at like, what are these, there's 12 specific values that they have, that they share all over the country. And it's broken down into sort of individual values, social values, and national values. And it really helps create a sort of a structure, a value system by which the rest of the country can operate. And that's helped me to really understand, for the entrepreneurs who are trying to enter into China, or for the people who are really trying to thrive here, like, how can you understand China? A lot of it comes through this China dream. And so for me personally, when I think about my China dream, it is this collective dream. And the dream for me has to do with moving from just a China-focused nationalistic type dream to like a world dream. How can we get to the place where we're not thinking in terms of China versus the US, or, you know, Europe versus China, or like Africa versus China, and it's like, how can we integrate all together to work as humanity? So that's my dream, really, is to get to the place where we're no longer thinking so much about national borders, and we're thinking about humanity as one species where we can all operate and collaborate together.
So it's ultimately about you and who you are. And you've been doing fantastic work for China and for the global audience, and thank you for that.
Likewise, Shirley, I very much appreciate your work. And you too, Antoine.
Bye-bye.